one of my customers rolled out WhatsApp support in Service Cloud, an application, a company called Suit Supply, a retailer in Amsterdam. And what's interesting is they rolled that out, and without even advertising that they had a WhatsApp channel, 60% of their interactions, their customer service interactions, now come through WhatsApp. That's without even advertising. It's incredible, right? So I think mobile engagement is really going to transform mobile, and it's going to really transform the customer engagement. And the last thing I'd say is proactive, right? This move to proactive service, and this is really multiple technologies really enabling that. Because if you think about proactive, is kind of the ultimate way to fix customer experience. Because if you don't have to call, if you never have an into, you never have to call, right? So how do you do that? How do you make it? And so one of the things is connected products. If you connect your product, right, into like a CRM application or customer service application, you can really transform that. So one of my customers did that. 96% of their cases are created by the product, resolved by the customer service agent. The customer just knows about it after the fact, like the issue resolved. But also analytics, things like that, right? So those are kind of the three big things we've been seeing. We're seeing them accelerating in 2016. We're enabling a lot of capabilities around that, investing a lot around those. But those are things I'm really excited about.
Great chat. Graham, what about yourself?
Sure. Probably going to tie back in on to a little bit of Lisa and a little bit of Ian's presentations. I think with customer experience being voted the #1 business priority last year, there's always a danger that this kind of frenzied kind of approach around it and words like transformation start to get bandied about and abused. So I suppose my 2 or 3 points looking forward into 2016 might consider it a little bit boring, a little bit kind of foundational in mind. But I think the first one is as you set out on the customer experience journey, you shouldn't believe that you're so far behind everybody else. Because I think, in that frenzy kind of mindset, and you go to conferences, you hear the same 2 or 3 references bandied about all the time.
Sure.
You would think that taxi companies have led the way for many years in terms of experience. Some of these organizations that are heavily referenced are kind of born digital organizations. They haven't had a heritage and a legacy infrastructure and organization to deal with. So you have to start the journey somewhere. I think you have to start from a position of where you're strongest. But I don't think you should start it in a negative sense, thinking you have to play this massive catch-up game because it will probably lead you to doing things that you shouldn't be doing, #1. I think secondly, there's this concept of liquid expectations. And that's really bringing to the fore, don't look within your own industry for ideas or copying other organizations. You're not competing against your direct competitors anymore. You're competing against your experiential competitors, right? And they're not necessarily, proximity-wise close to you, but your customers, are experiencing. It could be airlines, it could be other verticals that they're taking it from.
I would say that the 3 that I think are emerging very heavily for the year from the research that we've been doing on autonomous customers, we like to call them, there are 3 things I think we need to think about. A lot of them have already been mentioned, but I think this notion of effort, easy, is a very, very big piece to consider. And absolutely, I agree, make it easy for employees as well as easy for customers, because there is a very distinct mirror between customer experience and employee experience. So how do we make it easier for customers to access things across multiple channels? And let's not make the customers do the work when they skip channels, because it's a perfectly natural behaviour. Customers are goal directed. How do we make it easier for customers to go to their goal regardless of what channel they're using? So how do we connect that together? And how do we make it easier for our poor frontline employees who are basically bearing the brunt of this shift to complexity? Because if we put more into the customer space and make it easier for customers to do stuff, it leaves our frontline people in the contact centres and maybe our engineers and our frontline people in face-to-face situations dealing with the complex and emotive stuff. So they've got a tougher job. Hence, we were talking. I think the last time I spoke at this event, I was talking about super agents who had their underpants on over their trousers, because that's the kind of skill set that we possibly need in our front line, because they're having to deal with this difficulty. So I think make it easy, make it personal. So I think personalisation is absolutely key, linked into things like proactivity. and the fact that we also have opportunities around things like the Internet of Things and smart cities, and frankly, we are just giving lots and lots of data about ourselves away. How on earth do we actually start to use that personalisation to actually create much more personalised and individual customer experiences? If we do have that data, the snag is we might also cross the creepy line on that, so we might end up knowing way more about the customer than the customer knows about themselves, and that might not necessarily be what they want, so that's an issue on that one. And then the final one was actually one that initially shocked me from the data, but security. We don't talk about security a lot in the customer space, but I think customers, it's not really a surprise that this one came out, the data with the number of hack attacks going on, but I think customers are becoming a lot more aware around the security of their data. So is it secure? Are you going to keep it secure? And the trouble with that particular trend is obviously the more secure we make something, often the less easy it is. So the 50,000 passwords I now have to remember, along with PIN numbers and question answers, it's really difficult for me. So hence I've locked myself out of nearly all my bank accounts at the moment. So how on earth do we start to make it easy and secure? And obviously I work in the innovation space in BT, so biometrics. Well, we've been talking about biometrics for a long time in innovation, but it's starting to come down on consumer devices. So can I use bits of my body to make it secure and easy to access things? So I think, the easy piece, the personalised piece, and the secure piece are three themes that are coming up very strongly in the research that we're doing.
The only thing I would add is that word easy doesn't just apply to technology and products and the experience, but it's also overall to your approach in trying to get your organisation to evolve, to become customer-centric. Too many companies are making it far too complicated. You do not need to spend huge sums of money on sorry if anyone is a consultant out there. You do not need to spend huge sums of money building big projects and programs with people. This is more about three key things that I would say. I've got more than that, but my top three are leadership, commitment, and knowledge. Perfect. All right, that's what I would say. If you've got right leadership who are committed to it, and people know what this thing is and what their role to play is, you can make a huge difference. But don't overcomplicate it.
Yeah, I mean, I personally do think it's certainly what BT needs, if I'm honest, and that's because we are trying to make a big change, and you've got to show that you're not just talking about it, but you're evidencing it. Yeah. So one of the big criticisms, and Nicola's nodding because she's on the brunt of many of our investment decisions, one of the big criticisms is how do we make our decisions and what we invest in. So we've made huge investments in BT Sport, huge investments in fibre deployment in the UK, for example, and they're arguably all customer things, but then we'll make kind of half-baked decisions as well about how close to the home do we, end the fibre, how easy we're going to make, there's lots of compromises we make as well, and it's often in the nicest way where the accountants take over. And when you've got a very clear focus on your bottom line, which we have had, you don't necessarily look at the long-term opportunity for growth, which is different, and it pays back over a different time period. So I personally, I'm trying to think of a decision that wouldn't have some customer impact. And I can't
defend yourself.
Well, I was going to say if it was PC to give a CCO a hug, because that's absolutely right.
Wheel of love, free love. Yeah.
Interestingly, you mentioned in your question about customer experience should be reactive. Well, actually, I disagree with that, because the whole point is that the better able you are to understand how your customer feels, the better enabled you are to proactively work with them. Now, where a business makes a decision not caring or thinking about the effect that decision might have on the customer, you can't be proactive. So, for example, all organisations will have to make a decision that customers aren't going to like. All right, that's just the way of the world. You're always going to have to make those decisions. But if you have thought about, so how are they going to feel about it, you can then proactively determine what you're going to do to ensure that those customers that don't like the decision understand why you've done it. Too many businesses just make the decision and don't care. We just have to pick up the pieces afterwards. So that's what it means, which is why I absolutely believe that it doesn't matter what the decision is, you've got to be consciously aware of how the customer will feel about it.
I think actually that's one of the evolving roles that the contact centre is starting to achieve is becoming someone described it as the canary in the cage the other day, in that the contact centre almost is your pulse. So when things are going wrong, the contact centre is often the first place for contact. And rather than just routinely taking transactional calls, what we're increasingly seeing is the contact centre is becoming quite key to customer experience strategy now, because it's kind of the sense and respond. So it's not the contact centre's fault half the time that things are going on, but they will know if the website's down or someone's having trouble with their product. And actually, we are starting to see that sort of real strategic side of the contact centre coming out, because if you can use it as your sense and respond piece, where things that are customer affecting, we can go into the business and go, what's going on here? How do we improve this? How do we make it easier for customers? How do we also inform customers if things are going wrong? How do we become more personalised and proactive? That's a really interesting place for a contact centre to be, and that also justifies the investment in the contact centre, rather than it being, let's process lots and lots of calls really fast and cut the costs.
We have a strategy because we need one. If I'm brutal, we need one, and we need to be really clear on, evolving over time to something that's going to make this a lot easier. There are lots of organisations that just get out of bed and behave like that anyway, and they're the people they hire, they make decisions on that basis, and they've never really need to reset it.
Do they tend to be smaller SME size? When you get to a very large where you have 90,000 people working there?
The comparison, I don't know how many people have heard of Waitrose or know about John Lewis and Ocado in the UK, but they're one of my favourite companies. They're owned by the employees. They are inherently very customer oriented in what they do and how they convey themselves and how they, everything they do, and they are market leading. They're innovative. They have a very caring kind of brand, and they've a long legacy as well. So I think some organisations are just like that, and you can't bottle it. It's something that you either have or you don't have.
We were also talking earlier today about First Direct, which is a similar. Given they're owned by HSBC, they kind of leave them alone as a brand, but they're the most recommended bank in Europe. And I love them. I don't say that about banks a lot, but I do love them because they have that concept. And I remember actually doing benchmarking many years ago, and we used to benchmark banks and people like that, because we don't benchmark other telecoms companies. It makes sense to benchmark the best. And First Direct came up, and we sat with them, and we were going through what BT measures versus what they measure. And they were kind of, where do you measure that? Because things like call handle time and customer satisfaction, they had inherently in their culture that recommendation. I think they were one of the first to adopt Net Promoter Score as well. So it is very much, I agree with Lisa, it's very much as part of their culture.
The risk of not having a strategy is, it's going to cost you a lot of money, because ultimately companies that don't have the facts don't know what works and what doesn't work, because all they're looking at are numbers on spreadsheets, which tend to relate to revenue or profit. And if revenue goes down and they don't have any facts that help them to understand why it's gone down, then they come up with a word that is not a technical word, but let's do some stuff to try and get that number to go back up again. That doing that delivers what I call random or unintentional experiences, because you don't know what's working and what isn't working. You just need to react to numbers going down by doing stuff, and it just means that your organisation is just so overburdened with doing too many things but not necessarily doing the right things. Now, sometimes they'll get it right, sometimes they'll get it wrong. So having possession of the facts is absolutely critical. And Lisa, in her position, Lisa can't fix the whole of BT, as you've already said.
Yes, I know.
It's just so enormous. Where do you start? Yeah. But if you don't have possession of the facts, then potentially you could set an army of people off trying to fix so many things, where actually what's required is focus. And having the right measurement in place that gives you the truth, because that's what you need, will allow you to focus on the small number of things that will have the greatest effect on improving customer perception. And so if you're sitting there thinking, well, I'm not sure we do have the facts, that is a huge focus for an organisation to start with, because what do you know? You shouldn't be fixing anything unless you're absolutely certain you're fixing the right thing.
Everything we do is about the customer. So, I give you a kind of an oblique example, but the question set associated with buying an insurance policy, who gets up out of bed every morning wanting to do that stuff? It's actually really onerous. We have an underwriting department who actually, that's their job, is to think about these things. Every time we have to do a change like that, we question every single phrase, every single word that goes up on our website. So we in our DNA, we hire people who are customer focused. In our DNA about how we make change, we're always talking about it. So it's not something we actually say there has to be a customer strategy associated with this. It's just what we do. So I think it's more it's incumbent in how we come to work every day.
What's really, really, really interesting, I was very surprised about this, is a company called CEB did really long, multi-year study across, I don't know how many loads of, like thousands of 25,000 companies. They found really something really interesting, that customer loyalty does not increase if you exceed expectations, because customers want something. They just want, they go somewhere. They expect, if you deliver what you promised from a product or a service, if you deliver that, they're loyal. They're loyal, right? But if you exceed it, it doesn't improve loyalty. But if you don't deliver that, if you don't meet the expectations, that's the number one predictor of attrition, right? So essentially, it's a great study, and we can share that. We will share that information with the whole audience. It's a really great study. I highly recommend it. And what they say instead you should do, instead of delighting your customers, instead focus on effort, reducing effort. And that's what I want to leave you with. That is actually, and that's our core to our product strategy, is basically making it such that the customers that you access your service, service in the most effortless way.
I just feel, through all my years of experience and service and different things, this isn't rocket science, but it's really difficult. So I think it's just really holding your nerve and executing, and that's what's really, really, really hard, is just being consistent and keeping going at it. But it's not rocket science, unfortunately, because I'd love if somebody had the pill they could give me, and I'd spend a lot of money on it. But I think it's harder than that. So, yeah.
Excellent. Nicola.
I think one of the things I'm looking at the moment is around, we have an obsession about channels and omni-channel, and actually from a customer perspective, we asked actually customers, are you omni-channel? And they went, what's that? That's, again, it's using our language, as Graham said earlier. It's not what customers use in terms of language. I think we need to look at two things. What are customers trying to do? So what's their goal? How do we make that effortless? But also, how do we signpost them? Because we are in an omni-channel world now, and they are using multiple channels. So how do we signpost them to where they can get to their goal easily? So I think signposting is one of the things I'm becoming increasingly obsessed about. So think about your signposting.
Perfect, thank you very much. And Ken?
Yeah, just thinking that through. I go back to maybe some of the genesis of the conversation we had earlier. It's really, for me, it's about making sure that you have a strategy for your systems and your infrastructure to be adaptive and agile, because when you have that, you'll be able to change, and you'll be able to change fast, and you'll be able to fail fast and discover things to be successful and make rapid innovation.
Thank you. Ian?
You cannot deliver great customer experiences without people. And people are both customers and employees and suppliers and shareholders, and at the end of the day, customer experiences involve human beings, and the way you treat your own people will have a dramatic effect on the way you treat your customers. So don't think of customer experience as necessarily customer first. Really, I think something for you to consider is treating customer experience as people first.